When you think of Generation X, the image of the Latchkey kid shows up almost right away. You can see them now, out on their bikes, house key on a shoelace, the icon of unsupervised freedom. We love telling those stories, coming home to an empty house, inventing weird after-school snacks, watching hours of TV with no one checking in. It is a story we tell with a real sense of pride, a story about how we learned resilience and self-reliance. We call it what made us strong, but that is only part of the story. The real issue is underneath it. What if that self-reliance we celebrate was really the start of a vast social sorting machine? A system that, as the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu would likely argue, sorted the children with safety nets from the children without them, with effects that echoed across a lifetime. What if the real story of the Latchkey kid is not about universal resilience at all, but about social class disguised as individual merit? That is the uneasy truth sitting underneath the nostalgia. First, let us set the scene. The Latchkey kid was not some new lifestyle choice. It was the outcome of huge social and economic shifts. Through the 70s and 80s, you saw rising inflation, soaring divorce rates, and more women entering the workforce. The old single-income family model started to come apart. All at once, millions of us were getting home from school hours before our parents. The term Latchkey kid was not created as a badge of honor. It was just a plain description for a child who had to let themselves into an empty house. And while we remember the freedom, we often leave out the weight that came with it. Latchkey life was not just hanging out. A lot of us were running little households. You got home, locked the door, checked the cassette on the answering machine for instructions, started your homework, watched your younger siblings, and tried to make a snack without touching the food set aside for dinner. It was not every home, of course, but it was common enough to help define a generation that has been called one of the least parented, least nurtured generations in U.S. history. We look back on that and call it self-reliance. And it was. But here is the catch. To understand how that self-reliance shaped Gen X, we have to turn to a sociologist who spent his life showing how influence really works. Pierre Bourdieu. To see what Bourdieu would have made of Gen X, you really only need two of his core ideas: habitus and capital. Think of habitus as your internal operating system. It is the bundle of instincts, gut feelings, and ways of seeing the world that you absorb from your surroundings starting when you are young. It is not just what you think. It is in your posture, your automatic reactions, your sense of what is possible, and your feel for what kind of life fits someone like you. Your habitus is shaped by the world around you, and then it shapes how you move through that world. Then there is capital. For Bourdieu, capital was not just about money. He saw several kinds. Economic capital is the one everyone knows: money, property, assets. Cultural capital is the non-financial side. The knowledge in your head, how you speak, what books are in the house, what kind of music and films you know, and whether your background lines up with what institutions reward. Social capital is who you know, the network of relationships you can call on for help, favors, access, and opportunity. Here is why that matters. These forms of capital can convert into one another, and they work with your habitus to lock in your place in the social hierarchy. That was Bourdieu's great insight. Inequality does not only survive through money. It survives through the quiet fit between a person's instincts and the world that either rewards or punishes those instincts. So what happens when you apply this to the Latchkey generation? The shared experience of being left alone forged a very specific kind of habitus. Let us call it a habit of guarded competence. That habitus had a few key features. The first was intense self-reliance. That is one reason Gen X is so much less likely to ask for help during hard periods. It is not that the need is not there. It is that asking for help feels weak. We learned young that if the bike chain snapped or the homework got confusing or something in the house went wrong, you had to sort it out yourself. That built a real tolerance for being alone, a skill other generations often find unsettling. For us, solitude was not a crisis. It was just another day in the week. And this is where a film like The Breakfast Club helps make the point. On the surface, you are looking at stereotypes. The jock, the princess, the brain, the burnout, the outcast. But once the talking starts, the real story is not style. It is strain at home. That is the bridge here. The same era did not feel the same in every home, and the damage did not stop with the adults. It showed up in the kids. The second feature was skepticism. Growing up with Watergate, the Cold War, and watching our parents get cast aside by firms they had given their lives to, Gen X learned not to trust major institutions. We built a strong radar for insincerity and a deep respect for what feels real in a world full of phoniness. The third feature was a constant low-level risk scan. When you are a child alone in a house, you learn to notice strange noises. You map the exits. You run little drills in your head. In adulthood, that turns into crisis management, vigilance, and a mind that is always running what-if scenarios. This was not character building in the soft, feel-good sense. It was a survival style. We learned to be self-sufficient because there was no other option. And this is where Bourdieu gets brutally honest. Because while millions of Gen X kids shared that habit of guarded competence, we did not start with the same resources. That one difference changed everything. The Latchkey experience was not a great leveler. It was a sorting machine. Let us take two Latchkey kids. First, you have a child from an upper middle class family in a safe suburb. They come home to an empty house, but it is a house packed with cultural capital. The shelves are full of books. The parents have degrees and can still help with homework later. There is economic capital too. The fridge is full. The lights stay on. There is money for music lessons, tutors, summer programs, and the little extras that widen a child's horizon. And there is social capital. If something serious happens, the parents can reach doctors, lawyers, school administrators, or other professionals. For that child, self-reliance is a skill sharpened inside a safety net. Their independence gets praised as maturity. Their calm gets praised as initiative. Their guarded competence looks like leadership in training. Now imagine a latchkey child from a working-class family. They come home to a small apartment, maybe with the added job of watching even younger siblings. Economic capital is tight. Cultural capital is different. The parents may be working physically draining jobs and may not have the formal education to help much with schoolwork. Social capital is thinner too. The network is family, neighbors, and others living under the same strain. Not a long contact list of people with reach. For that child, the exact same self-reliance looks very different to the outside world. Their independence gets read as scrappy or even defensive. Their skepticism gets dismissed as attitude. Their time alone may carry real fear, real boredom, and real risk. That is where the weakness shows up. Not in the child, but in the gap between the child's instincts and the support underneath them. And that is the whole system. Society does not reward self-reliance by itself. It rewards self-reliance when it is backed by capital. The first child's competence is seen as leadership potential. The second child's competence is seen as something to manage. That is how class gets transmitted, not only through open bias, but through the quiet mismatch between a person's ingrained instincts and the world's expectations. The headline is self-reliance. The machinery underneath is class. So if Bourdieu were here to talk about Gen X, he would move past the nostalgic bike stories. He would point to a system that created a generation of guarded, self-sufficient people, but one where the value of that self-sufficiency depended on the safety nets you were born into. Your money, your connections, your cultural know-how. He would argue that the Latchkey experience was an ideal machine for carrying class forward, all while letting society praise the winners for their fine character. And that habit of guarded competence is still with us. You see it in the Gen X manager who is brilliant at the job but would rather burn out than ask for help. You see it in the sandwich generation, squeezed between aging parents and their own children, worn out from a lifetime of being the responsible one. And you feel it in that nagging sense that survival mode never fully shuts off, because you learned at 9 years old that no one was coming to rescue you. Here's the bottom line. The story of the Latchkey kid is not a neat story of resilience. It is a more painful story, and a more honest one, about how the same childhood can open into very different lives. It is the story of a generation sent into the world alone, where some were given a map and a safety net, and the rest were handed a key and told to figure it out. So I have to ask, were you a latchkey kid? What is the first grown-up responsibility you remember carrying? Drop it in the comments. Sometimes what theory struggles to pin down, real memory can still bring into focus. History rhymes. Status shifts. Stay inquisitive. History rhymes. Power rebrands. Stay inquisitive.